Good evening everyone, welcome to Politics in the Pub. I am Chandran and I'll be chairing today's session. Today's topic is the politics of marriage equality. Why are our politicians appeasing the religious right? Now, successive opinion surveys have shown that great majority of Australians, they approve and support legalizing same-sex marriage, and yet our main political parties, they continue to balk at this. Now, why is this so? Now, are they fearful of any backlash from the religious right, or is there something else to it? What is the politics behind it all? Now, to address these and tell us more about the topic in general, we have two wonderful speakers with us. They are Kat Rose, who is on your far left, and Matthew Robertson, who is on your near left. They're both on your left, that's the main thing. Now, Matthew Robertson is a Greens councillor on Woolhara Council from Paddington. He has twice contested Malcolm Turnbull's seat of Wenford as the Australian Greens candidate. Great. Matthew is a long-term campaigner for marriage equality, a former convener of the NSW Greens Sex, Sexuality, Gender Identity Working Group, and currently the elected Greens NSW LGBTI spokesperson. So, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Kat Rose and Matthew Robertson the usual way.
The place I always like to begin is with some statistics from the Gay and Lesbian Health Alliance. Statistics that reveal that for young LGBTI youth, they are up to at 4 times greater risk of everything from self-harm through to mental illnesses like depression, like anxiety, 4 times more likely to commit suicide and to attempt suicide. So those are quite staggering statistics, and I think it's always worth starting there, because ultimately that is what the long campaign for marriage equality is about. It is about reversing those statistics so that young gay and lesbian people can grow up in a world where they feel like they are true equals to their heterosexual counterparts, and like they do not feel as if they are second-class citizens with all of those rights that the civil law can provide equally, but for the biggest, most important and most symbolic of those rights, which is the right to marry the one that you love, free of discrimination on the basis of your sexuality. The campaign for marriage equality has been a long one, and every time I have been asked to speak on it, every time I have addressed a rally, every time I have been there campaigning on the streets for this issue, I remind people of those statistics, because personally I couldn't give 2 hoots about ever getting married. But do I give 2 hoots about having access to the institution of marriage, about having the right to choose the one I love, irrespective of their sexuality? Do I give a shit about having that right? Absolutely I do. And primarily I do because I am interested in the next generation of young gay and lesbian people growing up feeling as if they are equally valued equally to their heterosexual counterparts. And we can only achieve that if we achieve change in that upper echelon of our legal system, in that very symbolic law around marriage. Why has that been a very long campaign is that, you know, we've been going along on this campaign for about 10 years now, and in 2004, you may remember, if you weren't busy distracted by the Olympic Games at the time, John Howard snuck that nasty reform to our Marriage Act, our Commonwealth Marriage Act, through the Federal Parliament, and allowed for an express prohibition against same-sex couples entering into the institution of marriage. So I think in Australia, the campaign began off the foot of that backward step that took us back and said, no, we're going to entrench homophobia in our very legal system and deny same-sex couples the right to marry. I think the extent of the campaign the good fight that's been had by many has left us in a place of utter frustration, and in some cases the left has really fractured around this issue because it's been 10 years in a country where we shouldn't have an issue making this reform. But we failed to do so. Failed to do so when Catholic countries like Argentina and when our sort of legal grandparents over there in the UK have been able to achieve these things under a conservative government. It beggars belief as to why we can't achieve something this simple when over 70% of our population actually supports it. I think that when I talk about the left fracturing, when I talk about the desperation in the campaign, I'm talking about the type of thing that Kat referred to and the Rodney Coombe article, the kind of desperate measures that some in the movement are now going to try and win more support for this issue is the result of what is holding us back. And I don't think it's any lack of will on our part. I don't think it is the result of a campaign that's been in any way ineffective. It's been a very strong and a very positively fought campaign. It is because the religious right in this country are holding us back. And that brings me to why we're here tonight and what we're discussing. I think broadly, there are two reasons why the religious right are holding us back, and that's what I'll touch on now. When I was a student of international relations many moons ago, I remember a particularly influential lecturer that I had who really connected some dots around. I remember George Bush was in power in America at the time, and trying to connect those dots between, well, how does America go to war over weapons of mass destruction that don't exist? We go to war. We make decisions, governments make decisions because of the individuals who head those governments. And those individuals are very open to prejudices, to biases, to everything else that can befall human nature. At the end of the day, governments are just human beings, and they can carry with them entrenched attitudes of discrimination and of homophobia. I think connecting those dots is something that we always need to do, and we always need to remember that at the head of our government is just a person, and in the case of Australia at the moment, a person who has a long and public record of homophobia. So it's the first point I suppose I'm making to you is that the influence that the religious right has had on the mindsets, on the values and on the attitudes of our political leaders is directly linked to the decisions or the lack of action, in this case, that our governments, both Liberal and Labor, have taken on the issue of marriage equality. We've heard tonight a little bit about the conscience vote. To my mind, the conscience vote is the greatest tool in your toolbox if you're anti-marriage equality, or anti any progressive issue really. I mean, we've reached the stage with the Labor Party where we have the ridiculous situation of their party policy being in favour of marriage equality, yet they're giving their MPs what I call a get out of jail free card. In other words, if you're a bigot, or if you think your community, if you want to respond to the homophobia out there, then you've got this option to exercise your conscience of all. I mean, it's almost an offensive use of the term conscience, but you've got this option to get out of jail free, to avoid supporting party policy and to make any sort of excuse that you like. Something I'm very proud of of the New South Wales Greens and the Australian Greens is that when we go to marriage equality rallies now, we take with us a banner that says every vote, every MP, every time. In other words, as far as the Greens are concerned, we don't believe in conscience votes. We believe that people have elected our parliamentarians based on a party platform, and that it is the obligation of that Member of Parliament to vote according to that platform. And as you would know, the Greens have been signed up to marriage equality long before, as I say, this issue became sexy. Long before it became mainstream. A long time before we had Bill Shorten addressing the Australian Christian lobby. long before many MPs in the major parties were prepared to put themselves out for this issue, the Greens were there. The Greens were there backing the LGBTI community, taking a principled stand for equality and supporting this issue. I was recently, or earlier this year I should say, when the marriage equality legislation was introduced into the New South Wales Parliament, I had the great privilege of being in the chamber at the time, and there was a lot of conscience voting going on, I can assure you. As inspirational as it was to hear Penny Sharp from Labor and Mehreen Faruqi from the Greens introduce that bill and speak positively about all of the benefits that this change, this achievement of equality in our laws will bring, and I'm talking again about those statistics I mentioned at the beginning, it was depressing, frightening, and alarming to hear the views of some of the Conservative members of the House speaking out, exercising their conscience, so to speak, and exercising a vote against marriage equality. The views and some of the comments that were expressed were so infused with religious doctrine that I can't deny that there is a real linkage between the fact that between the way that these MPs exercise their vote and their cultural upbringing as predominantly white heterosexual males. But further to that, I think that within that context, within the context of most of our elected members in this country being of that majoritarian sort of demographic who are not at all sensitive to this community and the need to achieve equality, I think that the failure of our churches to take a leadership role on this issue has allowed those members of the major parties that sit in our parliaments and make our laws, it's allowed them an excuse to not take action on this issue. If we had a church that was out there proudly advocating for social justice and equality, proudly opening its institutions to all, free of discrimination, then we may find that we wouldn't have the type of voting record that we have, all the kind of stalemates that we've had in parliaments around Australia. Not one has been able to achieve marriage equality with the exception of the ACT. So I suppose the point I'm making there is that the failure of the church to take a real leadership role in a position of principle is yet again another type of get out of jail free card for those members of parliament who are making decisions about marriage equality. It really defies belief to me that at a time when the institution of marriage seems to be on the decline, fewer and fewer people are choosing to enter into that union, and more people, and divorce rates are increasing. It defies belief to me that the churches are not more open to opening that institution to a wider class of people and to be inclusive, not just of gays and lesbians, but of transsexual people and of intersex people. You would think that at a time when that institution is in decline, they would be seeking to increase its popularity, but they're not. And if you want to ask why, then I think you have to drill down into Leviticus, where you do find the basis of the church's preoccupation with marriage being between a man and a woman. Because to take up that preoccupation necessarily means that marriage cannot be between two women nor two men. And that, no matter however you want to spin it, is a homophobic position. And again, I go back to those statistics which have driven me in this campaign for so many years, because until we remove that position of entrenched homophobia, until we do achieve equality in our civil law, we will not find that young people can grow up in this world, in this society of ours, feeling as though they are true equals. I think that despite the achievement of any change in Australia, we can be hopeful about the future. I think there will come a day when Kat and I can give up doing all the talk that we've done on this issue, because we will achieve reform. I think it's positive to focus on the change in language. And reflecting on 10 years of this campaign, in the beginning we were still calling this same-sex marriage. We've moved beyond that, because same-sex marriage is no different to, what would we say, normal sex marriage. It's all marriage, and that's why we've moved to embrace the terminology of marriage equality. And when Bill Shorten gave that speech at the weekend, he used the term marriage equality. So I think that evidences that we have come some way towards achieving change. I also know that young people are not going to take this issue lying down. And it is an issue that is extremely important to them. In New South Wales at the last federal election, we saw the election of a Liberal Democrat who, despite an array of other policies that were quite extreme in terms of social policy, very much in support, active support of marriage equality, and drew in a huge demographic of young voters off the back of that policy. There is a tendency to think that we have achieved equality. You know, it's a bit like those people in Australia who don't acknowledge that we have any issues around racism in this country. I mean, it's just sticking your head in the sand. You might as well pretend there's no such thing as climate change as well. But I think the message here is that young people are certainly not subscribing to that view. They see that until we achieve change in that very upper echelon of our laws, until we have equality in that great symbolic law that says all marriage is equal and you can marry who you love without discrimination on the basis of sexuality, it's not really going to make two hoots as to whether you can get a Centrelink payment for your partner because they're a homosexual de facto as opposed to a heterosexual one. It's about achieving change at that symbolic level. That's the only way we're going to reverse those statistics. And unfortunately in this country, the linkage between the far right, its influence on the majority of our parliamentarians, affecting their values, entrenching homophobia, and that translating into the way that they vote on these matters in parliaments, really is what's holding us back. So I do give you that hope that young people, the next generation, everything they tell me when I campaign and stand on a polling booth is that this issue is important to them and that they will fight for it. So change is inevitable. It's partly what frustrates this campaign, but I promise you that one day it will come and we will reverse those statistics. So, thank you.